His name was Isbin before the ashes. That is the first sentence of a rough draft I was given by a subscriber. Hello, Zoe. Thank you for submission. I'll pin her comment down below if you do enjoy this story, as we're going to be going over, summarizing the first chapter / prologue of this story, which, may I say, is pretty good. And, showing what can be better, because it's just a rough draft. So let's dive into this. Hello, friends. Whether you come from comment sections to emails or recommendation pages, hello. My name is Ryan, the author, and this is A Path in the Pen. Whether it's your first time here or you're a recurring character in this place I call my narrative, my community, it's a pleasure to have you here today. I can't stress that enough. Thank y'all all for support. Greatly appreciated. Let's begin into Zoe's story. So the first paragraph, we're introduced to Isbin, where we're in the main character's point of view of Aurelia, as we see that Isbin, in Aurelia's eyes, is a misunderstood person, that no one remembers the boy, and he's this, people dread him. And, it brings intrigue because we don't know why we're exactly dreading him, and why he's actually has a different name now. He has Desix, which is considered in this world a slur. And we get to see, this builds intrigue, and you're wondering, well, who's Isbin, and when are we going to see this dude? When are we going to go through with all this? And then we're jumped straight into the ash-covered streets of Cinderella in Ignis. So basically, Aurelia is walking down these streets as she sees royal guards being trotted on by with horses. And almost all chaos breaks loose because of the fact that royal guards are new, all right? Because of the fact that princes ended up getting robbed. Why did they get robbed? Because in Ignis, we get to see that the poor, or the people who aren't well-fortuned, have to rely on stealing, bargaining, or flirting for cheaper prices just to provide for their families, right? And, they'll even go to farther extents to even get a loaf of bread. Stale bread, even. And we get to see that no one really likes these royal guards people because, they're just taking away the poor, because the poor they're panicking because they have to do all these things which are considered crimes just to survive. So they are assuming they're going to be put on trial as they're getting arrested. And Aurelia, she's just thinking she's in the clear because, she's not poor. She doesn't do any of this stuff. She just, from her words, we get to see that she actually works at the local gentleman's club. But she can't buy any more luxuries or pay extra for warm water. All these other things that lavish in other rich people's senses. And she thinks she's in the clear until she gets picked up and her hands get tied and then her feet get tied. And she's screaming. She's going through all this stuff. And she can't move. She's powerless to ropes. And then a fist collides against her skull, right? So then we suddenly get in this mindset of a dark figure lurking in the shadows after she gets hit in the head. Not enough to be hidden, but enough for it to be difficult to make out his features. And there's this crown off the top of his head that's, it's crooked, right? It's strange. And then suddenly she's in a chair bound by the wrists, the thighs, the waist, with a gag covering her mouth and darkness flooding through her vision like it's constantly moving. She tried to yell, but the gag made sure that no sound came out. She tried to thrash, but her attempts failed. And we get to learn that this person ends up getting close and gives her a warning. Don't say a word. Stay away from her. She will ruin your life. And you can't trust the person she's going to introduce you to or her. And their names are... Boom. That's the first chapter, right? We end off of what this is as she ends up waking up from this dream, right? And so I hope that was, at least exciting. I tried making the summary a bit more impactful because I can't really read it word for word, so I'm not really good in narration. I hope I did my best. But Zoe, really good story. I really like the cliffhanger and being able to, not being able to see who exactly the names are, right? It's a common but well used trope, and it's one of the ones that everyone uses at some point in their writing career. First off, let's just go over what's good about this. And I know no one else can see this, but just the headings, because she puts spaces in between every single paragraph, right? So around 3 to 7, I can't count exactly. And then, of course, with every single chapter, her first letter of that is going to be capitalized. So for her prologue, is his name was once Isbin, mid M dash before the ashes. We get to see that the H is capitalized, and honestly, that makes a book look so much more professional. So you already have like a professional part down with headings and all that, and with really like the font. And I think it's a good word size. It's really worded well. But of course, with everything good, the plot's good. There are some stuff, and I'm gonna have to figure out, because there's obviously, we all, as writers, we all have our issues, and that's just what makes us human, right? So, Zoe, please don't get offended. I don't think you will, but let's just dive into some of the critiques I'm seeing, and how viewers as well can also use these at home and make sure that they're writing a better story every single day, day by day. And the first concept is using too many eyes, right? So let me try finding one. I'm looking through the manuscript. I mean, we could pick this one, I guess. I was walking down the streets, the ash-covered streets of Cinderella, when the royal guards were first spotted. And how can we do that? You could do onomatopoeia if you wanted. So you could do thud, thud, in italics, M dashes in between it, my steps pounded, or skirch, my feet glided past the streets of Cinderella and you could describe what the royal guards look like, and you get what I mean. You can add so much more to the scene, to the sentence, with just keeping the same thing, right? So, and let me try finding a better example, because that was not a good example of what I was trying to figure out. Let me see. Okay. One of Aurelia was getting captured. The sentence that I'm looking at was, quote, "The first thing I did was panic," unquote. Now, there is a bit of issues, and I'm not trying to just get rid of lines, but I'm just trying to bring up the fact of too many eyes and why eyes sometimes become a bit too used. You just keep on using them over and over again, and it's super easy to do this in first person POV, right? So I don't blame you at all. But the first thing I did was panic. Now, how could we do that in a way better way, right? The first thing I did was panic. It's telling us that she was panicking, and then it says I tried to jump off. I was held down, but I let her saddle by ropes. And, it goes on and on about, describing her. But the first thing I did was panic. And basically, what I'm saying is you really need to, no offense, of course, show us her panicking without saying that she was panicking, right? It's the art of showing and not telling, right? So whenever the guard, especially on a showing not telling scale, when we're introduced to the guards, there is no people who are revolting through dialogue or, saying insults to these royal guards, or we don't hear any of the screaming. We just get the description straight from her. No, it's fine not using onomatopoeia, like completely fine. But we're introduced to the royal guards, but we don't see. Of course, there's always going to be, how do we show that they're brand new without saying they're brand new, right? For example, what was it? Nobody has adapted to the use of the royal guards yet. They were a new addition to the crown. Anybody living within the palace gates after word got out that one of the princes had been robbed, and our town was accused. And she goes around saying it's a valid accusation because, Sinril is the closest to the palace gates, and it's one of the poorest towns, if not the poorest. But nobody has adapted to the use of the royal guards yet. They were a new addition to the crown. How do we go about saying this so much better is basically just saying to the fact that, let's just say, for example, I'm trying to think of something off the top of my head. For example, if an old man has been living in Sinril his entire life, or an old woman, what would their reactions be to this new addition, right? Because we know that old people sometimes can get or older people can get really touchy about new things, right? And if if they're way too cruel, then they're really going to harp, because old people see themselves like this, especially in older times, is I've already lived most of my life, so I'm just going to let this person have a piece of my mind. So you basically have, you could just have an old man just muttering something smart, or being sarcastic, or just plain old insulting the royal guards and saying, like, you could just do the old trope of back in my day, and you could just build on top of that. And you get what I mean? You have to bring about these changes that nobody has actually adapted to the royal guards yet, by showing it and not telling us that they've done it. Was everyone's faces or whatever, because if everyone's panicking, obviously that's a way to show that no one's used to it. But at the same time, readers could assume that, that it's not new, it's just everyone's scared of the royal guards. But you have to be able to show, because I've always seen this, is that not everyone's going to be scared, especially when it comes to these poor people. They're just not going to be scared of some of these. Everyone else, every other character, whether they don't even get a name, whether they're just referred to as one of the people in the crowd, they all have dreams. They all had dreams. They all had a life. They've been living life, right? They've all had different experiences, and we have to realize that not all of them are going to panic. Some of them are just going to revolt, right? Some of them are just going to say, you know what, I don't care anymore, I'm just going to go revolt. So you could just make someone actually fighting back, someone trying to punch a royal guard. Something like that, to show that the royal guards aren't here yet, through dialogue as well. So you don't belong here, go back to your little palace, right? You have to do something with dialogue that shows exactly what it was. Like, let me think of a piece of dialogue you could use it for this. Just because your prince got robbed doesn't mean you got to haggle us dry. And you could just build it off by saying the prince got robbed, like, very recently, and, it builds off in this reader's mind, and, assuming your writer is going to be smarter and actually paying attention to the story, you can literally just bring that out in your story. And I'm sorry, I've been rambling about this one point, but showing and not telling is so difficult to make, because sometimes we don't even realize that we're just telling and not showing. So how do we show cruelty? How do we show these advancements? How do we show that this thing is new and not old, without saying nobody has adapted to the royal guards yet, right? Let me see what else I had written down. Okay, so no one else can see this on the video, but on the first page, you should at least have 1 or 2 sentences of dialogue, right? Because in Zoe's manuscript, no offense to her, honestly makes a lot of sense, we don't have dialogue until page 3, until we get into the dream sequence with the shadowy figure, and he's warning Aurelia about all these things, right? So we have to almost change that and make sure it's actually dialogue, because think about what readers do whenever they see a big paragraph with zero dialogue in it. And I'll be honest, I've done this too. Is just I'll just skim through some of the stuff. Like I'll just be going line by line. Whenever it's just dropping a lot of detail, and later on I'm just like, oh wait. But whenever you have dialogue mixed in there, people are much more likely to read those other sentences, right? And not skim over them like they're nothing. So that's another point. Hmm. But back on the point of noises, right? You can't just say it or screaming or whatever. You have to, with your senses and prose in a panic scene, you have to show through your prose that your character is panicking, actually. So I'm saying use a lot of semicolons if that's how Aurelia reacts to panicking situations. If she's calm and collected, don't get me wrong, then you can keep how it is. But during a panic situation, I mean, you can do that. You can literally show it where like it gets like a bit blunt and it gets really short sentences with her getting at ease and knowing that, I'm not going to get captured because I'm not one of the poor people. So, and then it gets automatically to long and rambling sentences as everything's happening and we're getting all these things pressed against us, like her trying to resist but nothing's working. And it gets this mindset of how her mind actually is, when it's going to just be a full-on overload of information because of the fact that that's how Aurelia actually is experiencing that. And we get to be immersed into the writing and brought out into this new form of, of discovery in writing that, yeah, no, with her, when she panics, if she panics, she's going to start panicking because she was not realizing she was actually going to get captured by the Royal Guards. So as soon as it happens, you just go off on a long tangent. It can have like one semicolon and a comma and conjunction. And, you can have at least that. So it's three dependent, sentences together, right? So, yeah, that's basically what I've been getting into, is make sure that, we really get immersed into the story. But I really like the first paragraph. I think introducing Isbin, or, Desix, is really interesting. And, I think it really brings intrigue, and it makes readers wonder whether, the shadows actually Isbin, maybe, or maybe it's someone else, or maybe it's something otherworldly. We don't know yet because we haven't been introduced to the story enough. And of course, that's going to happen in, chapter 2. And on a better point, I've always said this, is that if your prologue basically doesn't have, if prologues are only important or useful whenever you put the prologue, okay, as someone completely different from our actual main character, but it's still in Aurelia. So this is just a suggestion, of course. All of these are suggestions. Change prologue to chapter 1, because the amount of readers that I've seen and what I've done in personal experience, especially since learning, is that prologues are normally just to introduce us to the world. Like, of course, I'll read a prologue nowadays, but some readers just don't read prologues, and so they'll skip it and they'll wake up and, they'll wake up in this in the palace or whatever, for chapter 2, and they're just wondering, like, wait, what happened? And so they'll feel confused and think that this might be a sequel to a story or something else, right? Because some people just don't think sometimes. So always remember that if it's not a prologue, normally is just used just to introduce your story from maybe like some character that we might not see again or something else. But chapter 1s are always so much better, just to dive right into that story and being comfortable enough to, do said things. And yeah, I think the story was really well made. I can't express enough how professional it actually looks with all the headings. You're gonna have to tell me how many spaces you did in between and how you made the first letter capitalized before every single chapter, because I am absolutely amazed by what you're able to do with that. Like, kudos to you on having a good taste with font, with word sizing, with all these things, and being aware of this, because of course, I have stuff that's coming out. I have a novel that's releasing, less than a month from now, right? And I don't have this heading, so that would be greatly appreciated if you could do that, Zoe. So, yeah, but viewers, if you have any questions about writing advice in the comments, please let me know. And I'm sorry if you could hear that noise back there. I did not mean for that to interrupt, but yeah. So let's get into the outro. This is a pretty long video, and I'm sorry about that. All right, so that was pretty good, right? I hope I didn't ramble for too long. I hope I brought good advice. And if there's anything else I can help you with, Zoe, or viewers, then please let me know, and I will write a full-on, probably essay explaining some other story element or some other type of advice. I try my best to summarize a story, and if you don't think I summarize a story well, then I am sorry, and I'm sorry for doing Zoe that disservice, because she deserves for her story to get out there into the full-on world. And I'm sorry about the static images. Once my novel releases, we're going to actually get face-to-face stuff. But yeah, I'm going to head on out. I have a lot of stuff to do today, and yeah, I got to edit this. Y'all take care. Have a great day. Stay safe.